Okay, great. I'll kick us off and get us started then. Hello all, thanks for joining us today as we discuss mock interviews. I'm Melanie Damercourt. I am based in the firm's Atlanta office, and I manage recruiting for the firm's Atlanta, Boston, Charlotte, and Washington, D.C. offices. I'm joined today by Eric Greenberg, a real estate partner in our Boston office, Emily Miller, a labor employment associate, who is also in Boston, and Lisa Pachecky, our legal recruiting coordinator, who is based in Washington, D.C., and also works with me on the firm's East Coast recruiting efforts. In this virtual format, I do want to let you know that several of us do have pets, and apologies in advance for any noises that they may make during our presentation. I also want to take a moment to speak about the Belonging Project, starting with the word Ubuntu, which became popular during apartheid as Bishop Desmond Tutu explained a philosophy that our humanity derives from the humanity of the collective. Ubuntu symbolizes the universal bond that we have as people and the focus on our collective responsibility. This has truly been highlighted by the pandemic, which has illustrated how interdependent we are, and we believe that we all rise and fall together. Built on this concept, the Belonging Project is a collaborative network of professional and personal support for diverse legal talent across the industries, organizations, and law firms. Through the Belonging Project, we are offering opportunities and programs to support diverse law students and legal professionals during the pandemic. This initiative will contribute to diversity in the legal profession and encourage others to contribute and leverage their experience and resources. In collaboration with our industry partners, we will offer webinars focused on professional and personal development, one-on-one coaching, and a curated resource center devoted to well-being and professional growth. We invite you to please take a moment to visit our website, learn more about the Belonging Project, and there you can also register for additional information and to receive regular notices about our upcoming additional webinars. So why are we here? Why do we think it's important to speak with you today about mock interviews? Yes, and I may have had another box just pop up. Great. So we wanted to tell you why mock interviews are important. I have been involved with thousands of law student interviews and heard the feedback from the attorneys who conducted those interviews. And I can tell you from that experience that preparation and practice are key. A mock interview will help you learn how to answer difficult questions, develop interview strategies, improve your communication skills, and I think most importantly, reduce your stress before the actual job interview. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become, and your confidence will help alleviate some of the stress and anxiety of interviewing. You can practice with career services, with your friends and family, and with employers like Cyfarth and other law firms. With many law schools moving their OCI to the spring semester, you'll have a lot of opportunities this fall to practice your mock interview skills. We highly recommend taking advantage of any mock interview opportunity that your career services office is putting together for you. The more you practice, really just the more you'll be able to hone your message and feel much more confident. In addition to the interview practice, participating in mock interviews with law firms and other employers will help you expand your professional network. I've seen instances where the interviewer and the student or interviewee really hit it off and developed a mentor-mentee relationship. In best case scenario, I've also seen a strong performance in a mock interview lead to an invitation to participate in the formal interview process and ultimately lead to a job offer. So you really can need to practice and make the most of the mock interview. And Eric?
All right, well, thank you, Melanie. So we're gonna start with preparing your resume, because that's really where everything starts in a mock interview, because before the mock interview, before the real interview, the interviewer, the law firm, the attorney is going to review your resume. So perfecting your resume should be the first step that you and your career services office is a great place to help you prepare the resume, to double, triple, quadruple check it. It's really important to perfect your resume. I would also recommend that you reach out to a few trustful friends, including attorneys at firms or outside of firms, to help you proofread it, because you really want the resume to look great from top to bottom. Things to include in your resume certainly include the GPA, your class rank if your law school provides class rankings, and any affinity organizations. You would also want to pay attention to the verbiage that you use in resumes. Make sure to use action verbs and really describe your experience. Do a lot of showing of what your experiences look like. Pay close attention to tense, present versus past tense. We'll show some examples in our mock interview, our mock interview of a resume where there's inconsistent tenses for verbs. That's something you want to make sure is consistent. And then just finally, quadruple check for errors. As I mentioned, recommend working with your career services group at your law school or just friends and family to proofread your resume. Also consider including less glamorous roles that you may have had. Interviewers can learn a lot about transferable skills in retail and restaurant jobs that require you to work with the public, especially related to client service and working with others. At a law firm, in any law practice, you are serving the public, you are serving a customer. So those can be very helpful, even though they don't really pop out as professional experience that people initially would think of. I know some law school career services offices that actually dissuade students from listing personal interest or skills at the bottom of a resume. While it's a personal choice, and I can tell you from hundreds of interviews that I've done, I see a lot of interviewers make instant connections with a candidate because of something seemingly small in the personal interest section. I once had I was part of an interview panel where one of the interviewers also happened to be a Russian classic scholar when he was in college and really kicked it off with the interviewee just because that was mentioned in the resume. So I don't know, I know some law schools discourage it. Every attorney that I talk to that does a lot of interviews really likes seeing what the personal interests of an interview candidate are. It's important as part of the mock interview process to prepare yourself and do some research. So a good place to start is the firm's website. Things that you can look at the firm website, look at the values and inclusion and diversity sections. These are good resources to learn more about the firm's culture and whether their values and commitments align with your own. Additionally, you can look at the careers page, which can answer some of your questions in advance about the interview. You don't ever want to ask an interviewer a question that could easily be answered by referring or taking a quick look at the website. And finally, on the firm website, learn about practice areas, especially the ones that you're interested in and which your interviewers practice. One thing that you don't want to ask in an interview, as I mentioned, is something that you could easily find from a website. And one question that I get surprisingly a lot is from during mock interviews or real interviews is from a candidate is what practice groups are at your law firm? This is easily a question that can be answered from taking a quick look at the website. So while you're looking at the website, you also want to research who's interviewing you. Look at their bio page. See if there's anything that you can find in common with them. Whether they may list articles or awards and recognitions that they've earned. You take a look at those just so you have a better background of the attorney that you're going to be speaking with. I would also recommend that you looked at LinkedIn as well as just Googling the attorney. You can also find articles or other awards that may not be on the website that may be found on a Google search. However, I would recommend you not go overboard. It would be a little strange to bring up the names of the interviewer's children or a family pet. I once actually had an interviewee look me up on social media and bring that up, and that was a little strange. So I would stay away from that. Then finally, before you step into the mock interview, do some networking and research with other law students or people in your network who have worked with the employer, alumni of that firm, alumni of your law school that have been at that firm, just to get some more background information that you may not get so easily from internet research or looking at the firm website. So I'll send it over to Emily to talk about some preparation tips.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So Eric, it really put a point on how important it is to prepare your resume. That's the first thing very often that the recruiter or anyone at the firm is going to see. The next point is to really know your resume and to be able to talk about the experiences and skills that you've listed on the resume. I like to prepare for one of two scenarios. One, you walk into this interview room and the person interviewing you the first time they looked at your resume is 2 minutes ago. So you need to be prepared to, tell them your story, tell them what's going on your resume, your experience, your skills. The other scenario is someone who has studied your resume, and they're going to ask you questions that are really get into the details of what you were doing. And you need to be able to speak intelligently about the experience that you had, the skills, what you learned during that experience. So really have a good grasp on what you've put in front of this person. You're also going to want to be prepared to address any challenges that you might have faced during your law school career or your undergrad career, if you've included that GPA or class rank. A lot of folks do include their GPA on their resumes. Even if you don't, a lot of firms are going to ask for copies of transcripts or ask for that kind of information. And so you're going to want to be prepared to talk about, if something happened and you slipped up a semester or you had something going on in your personal life, figuring out what you feel comfortable sharing about what happened that semester. It's a really good idea to do that before you get in the door for an interview. The next big point is to have answers ready to common and difficult questions. So that when you walk in the door that they're going to ask, why this job? Tell me about, your greatest accomplishment in X role or the biggest challenge that you faced professionally. It's really hard when you're feeling nervous day of the interview sitting there. You may have a wealth of these stories, somewhere in your mind. It's pretty easy to draw a blank day of the interview, right? And so it can be really helpful to think of these stories and think about what you would want to make sure to highlight from them, and then to rehearse. Not to the point where your answer sounds rehearsed, but to the point that you can easily recall and make sure that you're going to hit home all of these points. And while you're doing that, it's possible that during the interview, they're not going to ask that question, but you want to find a window, if you can, to work it in. So maybe particularly around behavioral interview questions, if you see a window where it makes sense to talk about a lesson that you learned and throw in a story, do it. Keep it tight, keep it concise, and try to drive home those points.
So Melanie and Lisa, I think we have a couple questions already. Do we want to handle Q&A as we go or towards the end?
If we could handle them at the end, we have a Q&A slide at the very end of the.
Okay. So thank you for folks who have been writing questions. There's an option where you can write in a question through the text box. Continue to do so, and we will try to hit as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end.
That's great. Yes, keep your questions coming. That's great. So as Emily's point about keeping your answers prepared, but also kind of tight and concise, the STAR method is a great tool that you can use. It's an acronym that stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Results. So following this method will really help you stay on track and answer those questions as clearly and concisely as possible. You want to start by describing the situation. You want to provide context. What was your role? What was your position? If they're either as a student or during a work experience. So provide an overview of your position and describe the situation or challenge that you faced. What was the task that you're responsible for completing? Explain what needed to be accomplished and why. Then describe the action that you took. You can discuss how your actions worked along with were part of a larger group project, but the interviewer really wants to know what you did. Be specific. Don't say we did this or we did that. Really try to use the I. I did this, I accomplished this, I drove this forward. This is a pretty common thing that I'll hear after an interview, that perhaps the candidate didn't provide enough specifics and the interviewer wasn't sure what they did versus what the other group members did. So that's a really important one to keep in mind. And finally, I think the most important part of the STAR method is, what was the result? Was your supervisor who assigned the project, or a customer, or your professor, were they happy with the outcome? Was the project a success? What did you learn from the experience? That's what we really want to get to. You may have experiences that didn't go well. A common interview question is, to share a time when you made a mistake and how you handled it. So those are really great teachable moments that you want to share with the interviewer to help them kind of know what you've learned and how your thought process works in that learning environment as well. And as you practice your answers using the STAR method, you're able to really hone your message choose your words and phrasing that will best communicate an example of the accomplishments that you're trying to share. Most firms, most employers now do use behavioral interviews that will relate to the competencies that they have. The reason for this is that the most popular way to, I guess the best way to predict future performance is to look at your past performance and behavior. Behavioral interviews are linked often to competencies or the attributes that law firms seek in their successful attorneys. First, they use different terms, different terminology for this, but basically they're all seeking the same characteristics. We want to seek legal acumen and intellectual curiosity, integrity and respect for colleagues, innovation and creativity, analytical thinking and problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, good judgment, engagement, and drive. You'll see that working well with colleagues and teamwork are important to firms, and you should anticipate being asked a question about group projects that you've participated in and completed throughout your academic experience. You can see analytical thinking and problem solving is one of the competencies that we seek. So you can anticipate a question that would be, around that. Just give me an example of a time when you came up with a creative solution to a problem, or where you made a process improvement that improved the efficiency of a work process that was already in place. You can illustrate your engagement simply by being engaged throughout the interview process. Through your body language. A lot of these will be, virtual interviews. So by being engaged, just trying to have good eye contact, watching your body language throughout the interview, showing that you're interested in what the interviewer is saying, and also the questions that they're asking you, and really listening. I know sometimes when you're in an interview, you're already kind of thinking what you're going to say next, and it's really important to take a beat and listen to what the interviewer is saying.
So to go to Emily's point, to better prepare, it's important to practice your response to common or difficult questions. Here are some examples of common or difficult questions that an interviewer may ask. Think about how you can be concise and how you can incorporate examples or anecdotes in your responses. That being said, the greatest advice I've heard from an interviewer is to be human. While it's important to practice, you don't want your answers to come off canned or rehearsed. Be authentic and don't be afraid to show your personality and let that shine through. If the firm's values are included on the website, you may want to participate and anticipate that their interview questions will mirror these. And at the end of the interviewer will likely ask if you have any questions, and the answer should be yes. If you don't ask questions at the end of the interview, they may assume you're uninterested or did not do your homework. You want to ensure your questions are good questions that show your genuine interest in the firm or practice and are not easily answered by looking at the firm's website. Here are a few examples of questions you may want to ask. You could also tailor them to the specific interviewer so that you know you've done your research.
Lisa, can I add a point on this topic here?
Yes, of course.
So I would be prepared to have a lot of questions to ask your interviewer. Sometimes the interviewers that law firms pick might be a substitute for someone who does a lot of routine interviews, and the substitute may not have a lot of experience. So they may only ask you 3 or 4 questions and then turn it over to you to ask questions, and you're only 5 minutes into the interview. There have been situations when I remember when I was interviewing for positions where that happened. And sometimes you're going to want to try to fill up the remaining 20 minutes with questions to show your level of interest, to show your level of engagement, just because the interviewer may not ask you many questions to start with. So it's good to have in your pocket a lot of questions to ask about.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. And during these unprecedented times, virtual interviewing has become more of a reality, and we wanted to touch on a few tips and best practices. First, be professional and engaged at all times. It is easy to feel more comfortable at home than you may in an office or a school setting. You want to ensure you have a professional mindset going into the mock interview. This includes your attire. Ensure your outfit is professional from top to bottom, as you never know what could happen during the course of an interview, and it's important to be prepared. Being dressed professionally will also instill a greater confidence and remind you to keep that professional mindset. Secondly, remember your background. Pay attention to what is visible behind you. It may be helpful to do a test run on Zoom to see what you would look like on camera and make any necessary adjustments. Unless you have a standard law school background, virtual backgrounds may be distracting, so you may want to stay away from using them. And make sure you have adequate lighting and no shadows to make it difficult for the interviewer to see you clearly. Sometimes virtual interviewing or talking to a camera can make you feel awkward or uncomfortable. So just like an in-person interview, you want to maintain a certain level of eye contact. Some helpful tips include raising your camera or your laptop to eye level. And most video platforms such as WebEx or Zoom offer a window where you can view yourself. It may be helpful to move this window near your camera, and your eyes will gravitate toward your image, and it'll be helpful to have it near where you're looking. And lastly, you want to eliminate any potential distractions. Move anything out of your way that could cause a distraction, such as your cell phone, so that you're not tempted to check the time or your phone if it were to vibrate during the interview. You want to ensure you're in a quiet area, but interviewers do understand that things can happen during the course of a virtual mock interview that may be out of your control. It's okay to acknowledge at the beginning of the meeting you may have pets or roommates causing some unexpected noise in the background, such as Melanie did at the start of this webinar. A simple acknowledgement can go a long way. You'll feel less stressed during the course of the mock interview and be able to put your best efforts forward. You can mute yourself if needed, but you don't want to leave yourself on mute when you're not speaking the entire time. But again, you want to show that you're engaged in the conversation.
Great, thank you. So we often say this in recruiting, that recruiting is really more art than science, and the personal connection that you're making with an interviewer is very important. That's why, as others have already said, it's really important to be sincere, be your authentic self during the interviews. The partners, the interviewers, they really want to get to know you. They're evaluating how you'll work with their team members and also with their clients. They want someone who has likable confidence, not to be confused with arrogance. And they want someone who's going to not, say bad things about previous employers, law professors, different group members. So stay positive. You really need to keep it 100% positive. And now for the fun part of our webinar, we're going to have our mock interview with Eric playing the role of interviewer, and Emily is going to play the role of a student being interviewed. You'll see from the following resume that Emily had really great, impressive experience when we met her. We have taken the liberty of changing a few details on her resume then. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric and Emily, and here's a copy of her resume for your review.
All right, great, thank you. So Emily, thank you for coming to SciFar for this mock interview. We're going to treat this like a real interview. Usually when we do interviews, you interview with a panel of people, and there's usually about 2 or 3 sessions, but we're just going to do one session today. I'm going to start asking questions to you as if you were coming in for a real interview, and then after the conclusion of the interview, I'll give you some constructive feedback, as well as give you some feedback on your resume that I reviewed prior to the interview. So once we get started, we are going to pretend that this is a real interview. Are you ready, Emily?
That sounds great.
All right. Hi, Emily. I'm Eric Greenberg. I'm a partner in the real estate group. Thank you for coming today. So, just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, certainly. Well, first, thanks for having me. So I'm in law school in the evening program at Suffolk University in Boston, and I've been working full-time through that process. And I moved to the Boston area to get a master's in theological studies in 2010. And yeah, I'm really excited to take this next step in my career and start looking for roles with a law firm, and really interested in SciFar.
So why did you want to become a lawyer?
Yeah, I've always wanted to. Since I was a little kid, it was just, I was drawn to legal television shows and dramas, and I want to help people, to help clients, and I really it seems like the best use of my skill set and problem solving to get in the door. And, some of my favorite mentors have been attorneys, and it just seems like a great fit.
How did you choose your law school?
So in Boston, there are only 2 schools that offer evening programs. And so I evaluated those 2 schools to see which one would best suit my needs and what I was looking for. I took a look at the faculty to see who was teaching courses or maybe had expertise in areas that interested me that I wanted to grow and develop. And I ended up choosing Suffolk because of that, and in part because of their labor and employment concentration that they offered, that you really had the opportunity to take a depth of courses in the area of labor and employment, which I was interested in.
What was your least favorite part of law school?
I have to be honest, it was a tax class I took my last semester. That was my least favorite. It was the right number of credits, and it was at a time that worked well for my schedule, but it didn't really interest me that much. And so I had a tough time getting through that course.
So tell me about a time, whether it was in law school or during one of your summer positions, where you made a mistake and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a story that comes to mind right off the bat is one of my first jobs out of college. I was working in higher education, and we had this big project that we were working on, and it had really taken, it was a 4-person office, taken all of our attention. We were working evenings, weekends, just trying to get this project done. My boss asked me to do something, and somewhere between answering the phone and sitting back down at my computer, it was a shared phone, I forgot to do what he had asked me to do. And that came to light a couple weeks later. He emailed me and said, whatever happened with that. And what I did was I picked up the phone, I called him, I took responsibility for making the mistake. I really didn't have any reason to offer, not that I would have wanted to make an excuse anyway, but I had just dropped the ball. And so what I did was I worked with my boss to make a plan on what I was going to do in terms of next steps. He was very understanding, and we were able to get things back on track that same day.
Tell me about an experience, working in a law firm or just working in the legal industry. It's a customer service centric industry. Tell me about an experience where you had to satisfy a difficult customer or client.
It's a great question. So over a summer internship that I had with a firm, I was in contact with a client helping on a particular research project. The partner had asked me to work on it, but the partner they were on vacation for the week. And so they had given me the green light to sort of go back and forth with the client over email. It was a pretty demanding client, and they were really expecting me to be available 24/7. And what was difficult was the firm actually hadn't set me up with remote access to, to have my email on my cell phone or anything like that. It was just the way that they did things with their summer program. They only wanted you to have access to things when you were actually physically at the firm. And so the client was getting pretty upset that I wasn't responding in the evenings or on the weekends. And so what I did was I touched base with a different partner at the firm, and they helped me to do a better job of setting expectations and identify another point person to handle things for the evenings and weekends, and really opening up that line of communication with the client and explaining the limitations of my access in a way that the firm felt comfortable with. That really helped to remedy things and to make sure that the client was getting what they needed.
Tell me a little bit about your process for developing the system to record and analyze data to identify trends in the legal industry. As you may know, we are very data-centric at Cypharth.
Sure. So I think data and analyzing data and trends is really important. And it can be really helpful to identify trends, to try to predict what's going to come next, and to see where, a client might have some exposure to liability if the data is showing that that there's a problem brewing, frankly. And so my system is to gather the data, figure out what the relevant data is, maybe work with an expert, someone a statistician or something, to help to identify things that might be statistically significant, so that we can flag those and hopefully help to avoid any sort of issue for the client.
Tell me why you are interested in joining Seyfarth.
One of the biggest reasons is the firm's sort of outspoken commitment to diversity and inclusion. I've been a little apprehensive about making this switch. I've had some experience in other industries, and something about joining a law firm sounds intimidating. And to be able to see Seyfarth really hold itself out as a leader in these areas, you in particular, I was looking up who I'd be interviewing with today, seeing that you're a member of the DIAT Boston leadership team. I was really excited to get some face time with someone who is personally so committed to these issues.
What are you looking for in a law firm?
I'm looking for the right community of people.
And Emily, I'm getting a phone call. Keep talking. I'm just going to take this while you answer, though, okay?
Yeah, sure. So it's really about the people to me. I'm really looking for, strong mentors. I'm looking for people who will help me grow and develop my skill set, and who have a good reputation in the community. I want to really be able to grow my own practice in a firm that has a good reputation and great connections in the community.
All right. Well, thank you. Is there anything that I can tell you about my practice, about Seyfarth, about this office, the firm at large?
Yeah, definitely. So I was curious, what are the primary practice areas at Seyfarth?
Well, we're a full-service firm, so we have all major practice areas. We were originally started as a labor and employment firm, I believe, in the 1950s, but we have since evolved in all the big practice areas. So we have a very big corporate group. We actually have one of the largest real estate groups in the country. We're about the fourth largest real estate group. We have a growing litigation group, an employment benefits practice, and one area that we've really been growing just because the global economy has been changing, especially these days, is our international practice. Those are our primary practice areas. You could certainly go online to get more information about those, but those are the main practice areas.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
None that I can think of right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Emily. We're going to conclude this interview, and I wish you best of luck, and we'll be in contact with you.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're now stopping the mock interview. So Emily, let's go through a little bit of feedback on the resume first, and then we will get into some feedback on the actual interview. So one thing that jumped out at me on the resume was your email address. I don't know how long you've had this email address. Maybe it was when you were in college or in high school. It's a little informal. I certainly partied like it was 1999, and I still do a little bit, but I've grown a little bit older. So you may want to consider having a more traditional email address where it's just your name or something that's not something that you've probably had for many years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll consider it.
Okay. The next thing that I see, and I've highlighted on the screen here, is some of the verbiage that you use in the experience section. The use of the word monitor. It's not really like an active verb. It's real, that to me is just saying that you're looking at stuff. You want to try to use a little bit more action to make it clear that you've really taken charge on a particular task. Just sort of keeping track of something or participating in a project. Those types of words try to avoid because everyone can monitor and participate in a project. What did you really do? What was the thrust of what you did? The next item that I see, and I see this on a lot of resumes, is if you look at the dates on the resume, for the most part, you use seasons like spring 2019, or use just dates like just years 2013 to 2019. For the case manager at Harvard College, you actually put August 2015. That's fine as long as it's consistent throughout the resume. Either use months for every single entry, or just keep it consistent with years. But you want to keep that consistent. Also, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Your use of numbers in the resume, sometimes you just use the number itself, and sometimes you spell it out. So there's one line where it says 5 years of data, and then you spell out the year 5-year report. Again, just make sure that those are consistent throughout the document, whatever convention that you want to use. There's just there's a typo as well. Planned and implemented program and events under your interim coordinator position at Harvard College, you're missing a period. These are things that I quickly, that jumped out at me. I would recommend, again, giving this to one of your friends, family, a law school buddy, just to give it another, second, third, fourth look to try to get rid of all these typos. I may not have found every single one of them. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, now let's go to the interview, and I wrote some notes here. The tell me about yourself question, you're going to get that question a lot. It's a terrible, terrible question, but unfortunately, a lot of people who do interviews are, lawyers aren't trained to do interviews, and sometimes they just get put into a room, and that's the first question that just comes to mind. My suggestion would be to have a really canned answer for that question that gets specifically to why you're sitting in that room. Try to get through that question pretty quickly. I've been in a couple interviews, and I remember doing interviews when I was in law school, where when I first got that question, I went through my whole life story, and it took like 10 minutes to get through that question. And you only have 20 or 30 minutes with the interviewers, and it's a terrible question, so you want to have a really good answer that's quick, concise, and gets past it so you can get into some better questions. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. The question about, you had an answer that you wanted to be an L&E lawyer, which is good because that's what you're interested in. And this is more for the group. Depending on what you're being interviewed for, certainly if it's a summer position, you want to make sure that you don't pigeonhole yourself into a particular type of work. So if you're interviewing, let's say I was an L&E attorney and you came and said that you wanted to be an L&E attorney, which is great, but let's say you picked like one really unique aspect of L&E law, you may want to avoid that. You want to be a little bit, you want to walk this fine line of having a focus because now law firms are looking for focused attorneys, but having the willingness to sort of branch off in other areas within your particular practice area. Let's see. The answer to the mistake question, and this is a tough question. I hated getting it when I was being interviewed. It's a tough question because you want to give a real answer. Sometimes there's this feeling that you don't want to give too real of an answer because it makes you look bad. And one way that I think you could improve upon the answer is because you did admit to a mistake. You forgot to do something, and in the law firm setting, that could be a very bad thing. I think one way that you might improve upon the answer is by saying that you learned from this mistake and now you've put together a system or a process or a calendar type of reminder where these things won't happen again, and that you're happy to report that you've never missed another task after that one incident. So then that tells the law firm that not only did you get past the incident initially, but you've put together something, a change in the way you work that won't happen again.
That makes sense.
So when your reference to my work on the Sci-Farce Diet was great. In your answers to questions, one of the key things to do is to make a connection with the interviewer. And as long as you do it in a way that's natural, that really makes it sound like you're engaged, that's great. And what really came through was that these issues are important to you, and the fact that you researched me and the fact that that I serve on the DIAC committee just instantaneously makes a connection between the two of us. It's going to be something that I'm going to remember. The fact that it's important to me, it's important to my firm, and it's important to you, that's a great connection to make. And one of your questions, I forget if it was an answer to a question or a question you asked, you talked about the reputation of Sci-Farce. I think one thing that you could do is do a little bit more research. What is Sci-Farce? What's the reputation of Sci-Farce? What awards have we won? What areas are we trailblazing in the practice of law? Give concrete examples. Really shows that you've done the research, you've done your diligence, that you really are interested in the firm, rather than just a general statement that you're really excited about the reputation of Sci-Farce. That's one where you could look up at the firm. Firms are more than happy to brag about all the great things they've done. So look at the firm website to see what accolades they've won, what recognition individual attorneys have gained, and you can also just Google the firm. You'll certainly get some positive and some negative news stories so that you can do your own learning about a particular firm. Do you have any questions about the mock interview process?
No, that was great. Very helpful.
So I would recommend, after leaving this room, to continue to do mock interviews, whether it's with other firms, with people at your, at law school, or just colleagues and contacts that you have. Practice really makes perfect, especially since interviews are going to be strange in the time of COVID, and we're going to be doing it over the phone on video conference. Really practicing is going to go a long way in these interviews.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll take that advice to heart and really appreciate your time today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Melanie, Lisa, that concludes the mock interview portion.
Great, thank you. And I think we can see why practice is so important, just to really hone those stories. I also like that she said she wanted to go to law school because she liked watching lawyers on TV. That's one of my favorites. So we do hear that more than you would think. So I'm going to move us forward to the Q&A section. So I'm looking forward to hearing what some of your questions may be.
Just one last point before going to Q&A. Even though it's a mock interview, I would still recommend sending a thank you note if you're being interviewed to the interviewer. You never know, and I think someone mentioned before, sometimes these mock interviews operate as a stealth interview. There have been situations where we've had people come in for a mock interview that we're doing as a accommodation or as a favor, just out of a partnership with a law school or some law organization, and we get a resume in an interview that just knocks our socks off. And there have been situations where we've called in that person for a real interview to meet other people, or we at least put that resume in a file in case we have a need for that type of position in the future. So really treat it seriously, treat it as a real interview, and thank the interviewer and send a thank you note. That goes a long way as well.
Yes, and to Eric's point, Lisa and I, whenever we are putting together the mock interviews, always do send an email to the mock interviewer asking for their feedback and whether they would recommend the student that they've interviewed for additional formal interviews when we start our process. So they really can lead to something, and it's important to take them seriously and prepare for them as you would a real interview, going back to that practice that we keep talking about. So questions?
So why don't we read some of the questions that I see on the board. The first question that I see is it okay if the resume goes into a second page? So Melanie and Lisa, I think you screen a lot of resumes, so I'll let you answer the question first from an intake type of position, and then I'll give my, sitting on the other side of the table type of answer.
Sure. From my standpoint, reviewing a pretty high volume of resumes, or as a law student who has gone straight through undergrad to law school, really try to keep it to one page. If it's someone who had a professional career between undergrad and law school, in those instances, I think it's okay to go to 2 pages, but really we do prefer to see 1 page. And that's one of the skills of being a lawyer is, you know, concise writing, concise communication. So I keep it to 1 page as best you can.
Yeah, so I'll answer it from the side of attorneys who are doing the interviews. Attorneys are bound, especially if you're a litigator. Courts require you to submit pleadings and different filings within a certain amount of pages. So there's a lot of sticklers out there for rules. I think you're going to find more people than not are going to, sort of take offense to a resume that's too long, especially if you're not, don't have a lot of years experience where there's a really, really good reason why you may have to go into a second page. That being said, if there's, if you have some great experience and there's just absolutely something that you can't cut out and you need to go to a little bit of a second page, I'm personally not going to be offended, but to Melanie's point and Lisa's point, just with so many resumes getting screened, that may just be one reason that there's going to be a pass, is that you couldn't keep it to 1 page. All right, the next question that I see on here is, with OCI, sometimes we don't get to choose who our interviewers are. Unfortunately, do we have a recommendation in this scenario? My recommendation would be, that's absolutely correct. And in fact, sometimes the person who is selected to do your interview may have to back out at the last minute for a client issue or a personal issue, and there might be a last minute substitute who you have nothing about. So it's really just being prepared as much as possible. So for someone who's not in your practice area, do some research, find out what they do, be conversational with them, but don't be shy to explain that even though you're being interviewed by a real estate attorney, that your preference is in labor and employment, but still show them that you've done research on their practice, you know who they are, and it's also just a good reason to do your research also on the firm in general, so that you have a good understanding of the other practice areas in the firm and other things that the firm does.
Yes, that happens more than we would like for it to, with on-campus interviews and also with callbacks. Some people have to drop out at the last minute. Oftentimes for OCI, someone will usually write maybe on the schedule outside if there's a change in the interviewer. So you may be able to take, 5 minutes before your interview just to quickly look the person up on your phone and do as much research as you can on a quick basis. But also that interview would understand. They would know they were a last minute replacement and that you likely will not have had time to research them, but that does happen much more often than we would like for it to. Just as you spend time researching and getting your questions prepared, we also spend time trying to put together the perfect schedule. So it is very frustrating for everyone when that happens, but it happens more than we would like.
Okay, let's see, the next question, this might be better for Melanie and Lisa. Do you foresee that OCI next spring will happen online or in person?
That's a good one. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm anticipating right now virtual OCI. We've heard from some schools already who are planning to do virtual OCIs, and then, callbacks. I think it'll just, depend on if travel's involved for a callback, what different office procedures are for many of our offices right now, where we have started to slowly reopen the office, being very careful about the visitors that are allowed to come into the office. So I think it's just looking at where we are in January, February, March timeframe of next year. It's a great question. I wish I had a good answer, but I would prepare for virtual, prepare for both, but I would anticipate virtual, at least for OCI, and then callbacks. I think it will depend on if they'll be local or if they'll require some sort of travel.
Yeah, I agree, Melanie. With just in the news, just seeing the law schools and the colleges and universities just announcing that they're going to be virtual, at least for the fall, and the fact that a lot of law firms are still working remotely for the most part and just have limited capacity in the offices that are opened. Be prepared for virtual OCI in the fall and the spring. More likely than not, that's what's going to be the case.
Yeah.
All right, how can one land an interview as a lateral hire absent solicitation for hire?
I can start with that one.
Okay.
I would really recommend working your network. So if you look for alumni on the firm's website, look at LinkedIn to see who you may be connected to, and really try to start find a personal connection with someone. Again, if there are positions posted that you're interested in, it never hurts to reach out to the recruiter. To me, I just had someone contact me the other week it wasn't a position that I was recruiting for. It was another recruiter, actually another department, but I highlighted that person's name to the recruiter to say, hey, you may have a large volume of resumes that you're reviewing. This person took the time to call and said they're very interested. Just wanted to flag their name so you're sure to be able to review their resume and look at them as a serious candidate. I would really work your networks right now, especially alumni. And LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great place to reach out to people.
It's very important to work the networks. My view sometimes is if you're working with if you're looking at job sites and there's a job that's posted, there's probably a lot of people who already have applied for that. So it's good to get in early, and the best way to do that is by word of mouth. And certainly before we have a need here at Sci-Fars that we're going to post the position for, we ask our networks about, hey, do you know anyone who does real estate, leasing or single plaintiff L&E work? And we would prefer to get someone in the door that it comes through a referral. Sometimes that doesn't work, and we'll post it up. We'll post something on our firm website or a job recruitment website. But certainly, working your networks is really paramount these days. And then the next question is related to that. What is the most effective way to incorporate any networking we've done with firm associates during the interview? I'll throw out one thing. You may want to, depending on your relationship with those associates and the relationship of those associates that you may know with the people that you're being interviewed with, you may want to work that before the interview. You may want to work that connection and say, hey friend, I'm interviewing at your firm, I'm meeting with this person, and they may say, oh, that person's great, why don't I say something, great about you, tell me a few things. I think having that connection before the interview starts already sets the stage for the interviewer, makes them, aware of that situation, maybe avoid some uncomfortable, just like, oh, I didn't know you knew that person. But any connection that you can make with who you're being interviewed with or the firm is a good thing.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Working that network. In pre-COVID times, we would say, offer to take someone out for coffee. Associates are often very busy. They may not have time for coffee, but to connect with them, as Eric said. One thing I do want to caution, it's a fine line. At a previous firm where I worked, we had someone who was extremely interested in the firm, and I think reached out to almost every single associate for coffee and just different meetings. So you want to, it's a very fine line to walk. So you want to show that you're interested, you want to work your network, but you don't want to kind of overwork it. And if you ever have questions, the recruiting department is very happy to speak with students and, lateral candidates as well, and, kind of provide that guidance on what's appropriate.
And I'll tell you, at Sci-Fars, and I can personally vouch for this, there was a law school graduate who was graduating from the law school where I graduated from, and he reached out to me and said, hey, can I just get some coffee? And I noticed we went to the same law school. Eric, you're interested in diversity and inclusion issues. I am as well. I'd just like to get coffee to chat. And every year or so, 6 months, a year, we would grab coffee just to keep in touch. And he was working in another firm. And then I bumped into him at an affinity group dinner about a year and a half ago. And I said, look, it's been like, 2 years since we got coffee. Why don't we grab some lunch? And at the time, I knew we had a need for a litigation associate mid-level and also real estate litigation. And we went out to lunch and, we got talking, and I didn't realize that his practice was real estate litigation. And I can say he is now an associate Seyfarth Shaw. and just, him working that connection over the years, even though we didn't have a need 6 years ago, he's now very happy. We had a need, and, sort of working that network over a certain period of time and keeping that relationship intact went a long way. All right, let's see. A lot of questions have come in. Let me work the scroll here. Okay, we have a question about the tell me about yourself question. In almost all my interviews, the first question that they have asked is tell me about yourself. My advisor has suggested not to talk about my resume, stating that it sounds generic. How else should I answer this question? Are there specific things that I should mention? So I'll take a first stab. I think that's correct. You don't want to go through the laundry list of your resume. That just takes a long time. I would try to, do a very quick sentence or two biography. I'm originally from, I would say I'm originally from Baltimore, but I came up here for college and law school. I've fallen in love with the city. I'm graduating from Northeastern School of Law. That's where I went. And I'm excited about joining this firm because it's strong real estate practice. You could add a little bit more detail, but don't go through your entire history of where you were born, like what you did for your first grade graduation. Really try to bring it to why you're in the room, quickly, why you want to be working at this particular firm. It's a terrible question. I wish we did more training internally, or other law firms did more training internally to tell interviewers to stop asking that, but they're going to keep asking that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that.
Oh, I was going to say, and to piggyback off of that, that's a great opportunity to also express your interest in that particular market. For example, if you're interested in the Boston market, but you don't necessarily have Boston ties, showing why you want to be in that area and showing your commitment to that is a great way to tie in a response for tell me about yourself.
All right, we have a question just about anticipating what hiring is going to look like at law firms for 2L positions. Given the current conditions in the industry, what does it look like that firms are going to be doing for 2L summer internships for, I guess, 2021, when those interviews would be happening, and when would the application process start? I know, Melanie, Lisa, what have you been seeing in the market?
So I actually have a call taking place next week about this with the Atlanta Legal Recruiters Association, to really kind of just talk about what firms are doing, learn what is happening in the market. There are some schools that are moving ahead with their fall OCI plans. Most are looking at the spring semester. We're planning to look at the spring semester. I think we'll have a much better idea of, the situation where we're going to be. It's hard to project the summer of 2021 now, but I think that by the time that we are ready to start interviewing in January, February, we'll be much better able to do that. I anticipate that we'll be opening up our application process at the end of this year, very early next year. But as I said, I know that some firms are planning to participate in fall OCI for those few schools that are, hosting their OCI programs then. But I think it's going to be a later decision this year because we just don't know what's going to be happening with with COVID, how it's going to be affecting the economy. There are just so many questions out there. But I do think that we'll have a much clearer picture. I hope we'll have a much clearer picture of that by January, when we're hoping that most OCIs will start taking place.
All right, a couple more questions as we're running against the clock here. Going about the note about Emily's email address that she used in her resume. And just for full disclosure, that was not actually Emily's real email address, but we were doing it for purposes of this presentation. Is there a preference between using your law school email address and using your personal email address? My view is you may want to use your personal email address as long as it's appropriately named and it's kind of generic. Just because depending on when you're applying for a position, I don't know how long you'll have access to that law school address. And for laterals, we see personal email addresses a lot: Gmail, Yahoo. So that really doesn't make the difference. It's really just what are you going to check the most, and you may not be using that law school address forever.
That actually was not that exact email address, but that's a real example that we see more would think. Funny email addresses. I agree with what Eric said, that at a previous firm, we actually went back. We were having a lateral position that we were having some challenges filling, and went back to look at law students we had met with several years prior who we really enjoyed meeting, but did not end up joining us as summer associates. And we reached out to many of them to just find out if they were happy where they were, if they were interested in reconnecting. So if we did have their personal email address on file, it would be a lot better than contacting them at their current firm or over LinkedIn. So you never know who's going to try to get in touch with you down the road. So I think using your personal email address is a good idea. Just keep it professional, keep it G-rated.
All right. Well, I think we hit the questions, and we're at our time. Melanie, Lisa, were you going to put up a slide in case anyone wanted to contact you further?
Yes, and I also wanted to share that this program is eligible for CLE credits.
It's actually, there was an email that it didn't get the credit, Melanie, so we
it did.
can't do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. Scratch that. But I did want to share, here's my contact information. If you have any questions about what we've spoken about today, I know that Lisa and I and the other recruiters on our team, we really like to connect with students and with laterals who are seeking new opportunities and who have questions. And that's really what we're here, is to help and advise any way we can. So here's my information. Feel free to reach out to me. And again, we really appreciate you taking the time. I know you've given us an hour of your time and learned about mock interviews and hopefully how to prepare for real interviews as well in our new challenging virtual world. But thanks again for all of your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And feel free to reach out to me. You can look up my contact information on the firm website. I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you, everyone.